away tonight, but we're back in full force and ready to go with this first session of the public meeting, or public hearing, in connection with the application relating to 648, 652 Canton Avenue in Milton. Just to recap, we closed the public hearing last week after a very long and involved public hearing process, many meetings, many postponements, lots of information, lots of testimony, but we finally closed the public hearing because we came to the end of the statutory time period. We're about to embark on a deliberative process where we discuss in open public meeting form this particular application and all of the many issues that are associated with it. And in due course, we will issue a decision, which I believe is due on May 4th, and we'll do that with the assistance of the town consultant, Judy Barrett, who has had a lot of experience in the drafting of these decisions, which can be somewhat complex and lengthy. So with that little bit of a prelude, I understand that there's a number of people who are watching tonight, and everyone is welcome to do so. It is an open process, and we're not going to elevate anyone to a different status other than to sit by and listen to this process unfold. So, having introduced the subject, I guess thinking about this today, I've not done this before, and I really haven't had much guidance on what's the best way to go about this, but let me just preface our discussion by saying the following. It seems to me that there are three sort of elements to our deliberation and ultimate decision, and they're obvious. The first is, and these are not in any particular order for discussion, but the first obviously is to decide whether or not we will approve this project. That's step number one. Obviously, if we don't approve the project, then steps number 2 and 3 would go away. If we did approve the project, we would then have to consider a very lengthy list of requested waivers that has been filed and submitted by the applicants. They literally go on for pages and would take us some time to sort of wade through each of those requested waivers. And then finally, again, assuming that we wanted to approve the project, we would consider what conditions we might impose with respect to that approval. And we've had quite a bit of input from the town, the selectmen, from the chairman of the Milton Planning Board, from counsel for the neighbors and neighbors, all of whom have submitted very detailed requests in terms of conditions that we might impose if we were to approve the project. So with that preface, I'd like to hear from you, Ted, and you, Mike, as to how you think we might most efficiently begin the process and proceed this evening.
I guess one way we could do it would be to begin by talking about any issues that we perceived that many of which were discussed during the course of the hearings, and whether or not consideration of those issues would weigh against approving the project. I would think.
Okay. I think I think that may be a helpful way to go at this. Because we have to address issues in really all three of the contexts that I just talked about: approval, conditions, and waivers. They'll all come up in the course of that. So maybe that's a helpful way to go, is to just sort of identify initially what we see as the major issues. There's many issues to be addressed, but the major issues that came up during the course of the public hearings that we'll have to address one way or another in the course of these deliberations. And so, Ted, since it was your idea, I'll invite you to give us the first several issues that you see that we should discuss.
Yeah, I guess, you tell me. I think you've sat on more of these cases than I have, but I guess another question would be whether whether any issues that are discussed or arise can be satisfactorily dealt with by conditions, or whether they can't. So I guess well, I can start with some of the issues. I guess one of the issues that came from the very beginning was the number of units, and an argument that the project as proposed is too dense and with too large of a footprint for that site, leading to problems with construction management and I guess, potential problems with stormwater and groundwater and drainage, and I guess other issues too. I mean, all of them, I guess, would, a lot of the issues would arise from, I guess, the density. Another is the volume of the height of fill that would have to be added to the site for the project, which alleged would increase the height at in some spots by up to 9 feet, 7 to 9 feet, other spots 5 feet, and create, in that sense, make the development up to 1 story higher when viewed from abutters, and also require, well, there's different figures on how many cubic yards of fill, ranging from, I think, 30,000 cubic yards to 52,000 cubic yards. And the trips that would take would ranging from 3,000 trips to, I think, 6,600 trips, I believe. I guess that would be another issue. There are some of the opinions with respect to the groundwater mounding analysis couldn't be more different in terms of how the I'm sorry, as far as what would happen after the development were built, post-development conditions, and how runoff from those conditions would create wet spots and break the surface and affect the butters. And it's difficult to find common ground on some of them. So I guess that's an issue that we have to consider too, whether there's enough information and enough data submitted to resolve that issue. Those are some of the, I have some other issues I think that are probably maybe stand out a little bit less. Maybe you guys want to chip in with your thoughts, either adding to what I've said or different issues that you see.
Ted, those are kind of the 2 or 3 main issues that I had in my mind as well, or at least the leading ones, particularly the groundwater mounding analysis, stormwater runoff and groundwater issues, as well as the volume and height of fill. Those are the ones that I think gained the most attention throughout the hearings. I think those 2 issues are related. And I think those 2 issues are also related to the density of the project and the number of units and all that. So those are, in my mind, those are the primary issues that need to be discussed. I'm not saying there aren't others, but I think those are, I anticipate those are the ones we're going to spend the most time talking about.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, yeah, there are a lot of smaller issues, quite a number of them actually, but I think these are the main issues. I think the question of off-site water impacts, both surface and groundwater, are the things that are the most difficult, frankly, for us to deal with, because as Ted alluded to, we've had sort of competing expert opinions with respect to the subject. And I sort of feel like I'm a land court judge trying to assess credibility and I'll ultimately try to decide which of the various experts that we rely on. Obviously, the applicants' experts sort of categorically say there'll be no offsite problems associated with the development. We have the applicant, we have some of the neighbors person testifying just the opposite. And the most recent piece of information that we have was from someone I really didn't even recognize the name, Peter Dillon from Tetra Tech, a March 22nd memo, where he seemed to say pretty categorically that there wouldn't be any problems associated with the infiltration system and with the whole proposal in his groundwater, with respect to groundwater impacts, which was a little bit of a surprise, frankly, to me. But that's what we have from the person that was engaged by the town to assess groundwater impacts. So, I mean, I feel like I'm in a quandary with respect to this issue, because quite frankly, I look at it, and maybe this isn't the way I should look at it, but the way I look at it is I'm concerned about ultimately feeling responsible someday down the line for people having flooded basements. And I don't have a level of comfort on that issue that I certainly would like to have with respect to this project. And I very much worry about it. And it's not just the people on either side of the project, and particularly those on the one side who already have water issues, but I worry about sort of downstream on the other side of Canton Avenue, which we heard sort of unrefuted testimony that there's already problems there. And it's not clear to me how this would impact or exacerbate those problems. So that's a serious issue for us. And one of the things I think we need to talk about is whether it's a non-starter or whether there's a way that we could condition a project that would satisfactorily address that issue. And at the moment, I don't have any thoughts on how to do that, but I mean, that's certainly something that we would have to consider, whether there was a way to do it. I've thought of things, maybe these seem far-fetched, but I've thought of things like requiring the posting of a bond to cover damages that would be associated with this project as it related to groundwater or surface water issues. And maybe that's way too far-fetched, but it's something that popped into my mind as something that you might consider as a condition. But that's really a major issue that you guys have identified, some question. And it ties back into the number of units, although I don't exactly know, I don't think we have any data to help us know how a reduction in the number of units would sort of translate into a reduction in the amount of fill and what impact one way or another that might have on groundwater. We don't have, I don't think we have that information. What we have is the information that relates to the project. And I'm not sure how we could engineer it to come up with a number of units that would reduce the amount of fill and reduce the problem in any meaningful and in intelligent way. So I don't know how we can condition that to deal with that problem. I think this is kind of ultimately, I think this is going to be an up or down issue for us. That's just my humble opinion on the subject. But yeah, I think that's a very, very significant issue. And you know, and this, and I think as you guys have alluded to, associated with that is the incredible impact that I feel like this project unleashes during the construction phase with the introduction of that fill to the property. It's really hard to imagine how that's going to work. Again, we could consider ways to ameliorate the impacts of all of that truck traffic carrying all of those heavy loads onto the site. We could do it by defining hours of operation to try and avoid the peak hours on Canton Avenue, to try to avoid enormous amounts of noise at bad times of the day. We could consider, you know, imposing restrictions or requirements that police details be there for, you know, the key periods where trucks are entering and departing from the site. But again, I don't know whether those efforts will be sufficient to deal with the issues that I think would be associated with it. I mean, I was struck just this week. I mean, I don't often happen to drive on Canton Avenue during the day, but I did in the early afternoon on, I guess it must have been around school exit time, and Canton Avenue was a disaster. And I just couldn't help but think to myself, how is this going to work with all these trucks on this street in its current condition? But anyway, so that's something we have to consider. Now, on the other hand, if I'm the developers council, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, but this is short term. And so, you know, it's going to be done. And yes, there's going to be a certain amount of pain to it. But, you know, you need the housing here in Milton. And so that small amount of pain for that period of time, you know, it's just something you have to live with, because when it's done, we'll have all this wonderful housing and all the trucks will be gone, and not to worry. So, I mean, that's sort of the flip side to that coin, which is we don't meet the 10% requirement. And this is a project that would bring us, you know, considerably in that direction to meet that requirement or that threshold. And, you know, should we allow, you know, a temporary problem and issue in order to reach that sort of more long-term objective of meeting the statutory threshold? So again, I'm sorry to wander on and digress, but I mean, those. I think we've identified the key issues. There are other issues, of course. I mean, and I don't mean to belittle or denigrate any of those issues. I mean, I know the issue of trees is important to people and how we could deal with that. But my sense is those kinds of issues are things that we could probably address by conditions more readily, more easily than we can these more significant issues. I see Ms. Barrett has joined us. Judy, welcome. Nice to see you again. Any thoughts on how we should move forward with this deliberative process? We're all neophytes in this situation, so any guidance you can give us will be greatly appreciated.
You're muted, Judy.
Saying it's
Judy,
really tough to think of you guys as neophytes. So, you know, I mean, you just laid out a set of issues that you're concerned about, and I suspect that your colleagues may agree and may have some other issues as well. I think it might be helpful if you just sort of get your collective issues on the table, and then we have to look at what's in the record.
Okay.
That would be my advice. So, you know, on matters of traffic, construction period or longer term, you know, water resources or whatever the concerns are that the board has, I think you have to go back and look at what's in the record. And then, you know, you have the tough job of having these competing reports. You have the applicant's team has represented the project in a certain way, and the neighborhood has hired their consultants and they represented it a certain way. And, you know, your sort of, I guess, most neutral parties are your own peer review consultants. And I think, I would imagine you probably weigh pretty heavily on their input, but that's up to the board. What I would do in, you know, for you, as I've been doing on the other cases, is to start to draft a decision. But it's hard for me to do that when I don't know where your heads are on the project.
Okay.
Yeah.
Before you got on, Judy, we were talking about, we were kind of talking about some of the main issues that we were concerned about. And one of them, for example, was groundwater.
Yeah.
And that particular issue with this application could be an issue that is not, if we were to find a problem with groundwater, it would be difficult to impose conditions upon that issue, right? So that might be the issue that's dispositive of the rest of the application. Would you recommend that we kind of tee up one of the major issues for discussion, for example, say the next hearing, and we can spend the next 2 days doing our homework on that issue and then, discuss our issues then?
I would, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, I'm done.
Yeah, I think that's important. It's, you guys really should kind of identify the things that you're the most concerned about, the things that could be deal breakers, and look at what's in the record from the advocacy positions as well as the peer review consultants. Because I think that's what you're going to have to wrestle with. If you have, if your peer review consultants are advising you a certain way and the applicant's consultants are advising you a different way, you're probably going to want to listen to your own peer review consultants, but then you have to kind of think about, well, how am I going to be consistent with that? If the neighborhoods consultants are saying something that's different from the peer review consultants, who am I listening to? Where am I going to put the weight of credibility, I guess? So I think that's one of the things you're going to have to wrestle with. Because I understand about groundwater would be one of those things that's sort of hard to put a condition on, but you have competing input on that very matter in the record. So unfortunately, I don't think the record helps you answer this in a very neat and simple way.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, Judy, I think this is an oversimplification, but I think that the applicants, groundwater people, unequivocally say that this system will work and that there'll be no impact to adjoining properties. I think pretty clearly the neighborhoods expert has said pretty much to the contrary.
Right.
And in part, they say that they didn't do the kind of analysis that they have been asking them to do, and for whatever reason. But in any event, they're not persuaded that there's not going to be groundwater problems. And in fact, to the contrary, I think their written testimony has been that there will. And then most recently, we have, and I mentioned this maybe before you get on, but we got a fairly recent opinion, if you will, from the peer review consultant, which is a little less bullish, but nonetheless seems to opine that there won't be a groundwater problem associated with this analysis. This is from Tetra Tech, Peter Dillon, who's a senior hydrogeologist there. So that's the way it lines up.
Right.
And as I said earlier, to some extent, it almost becomes a who do you give credibility to issue? What's the burden of proof, and who's met the burden of proof? And,
right.
And that's really what it comes down to. But again, one of the things that I worry about is that however small the risk is, it's a small risk of a great disaster. And I just don't know how to fix it. If there was a way to condition it that we could intelligently fashion, then that would be one way to go at it. But I just think we have to go head on with this and decide one way or the other whether we can get past that issue. And if we can't get past that issue, I think it's a deal breaker.
Is there any additional analysis that you would want the applicant to perform as a condition of approval that would it can't come back to you guys for approval, but perhaps to the satisfaction of the Public Works Department or the Health Department or whomever? Is there additional information that the board doesn't have that would make a difference if it were done before they get a building permit, before they're allowed to do any site disturbance? That might be something else I'm going to suggest that you do while you're kind of thinking about your issues and what's in the record. Is be mindful of what consultants have recommended for conditions.
Mhm.
Because I think even the peer review consultants who may have said, overall, I think I'm kind of satisfied, it's kind of, I'm satisfied if. And they do make some
Yeah.
recommendations about, matters that should be conditions of approval if the board decides to approve the project.
Okay, I'll have to go back and read those because
Yeah.
I don't, off the top of my head, I don't know, but that's a good point. I mean, if the experts have given us sort of a pathway with respect to conditions, that's certainly something that we have to consider. And I will do that between now and in the next hearing, is go
That's
back
what we're
and look at.
working on with, that's what we're working on with East Milton right now. Is making sure that the pieces of input that came from the consultants over these last many months are not lost, that there were very important things in some of those reports.
No, I agree, but we, as you know, Judy, we've been overwhelmed with material. I mean, it's
I
just,
do.
it's
I do.
incredible the amount of material, and it probably won't come as any surprise to people that we haven't, mastered and memorized all of it. So I think that's a great point, though, is to go back and take a look at how any suggestions that the experts might have, not neophytes like us, but experts would have as to how we could deal with our concerns that post construction that we're going to have created a problem. And if there's ways that we could deal with that by way of condition, I think that's something that I would be very interested in pursuing. I don't have I want to be clear that I don't have a strong feeling about approving or disapproving. I come to this really with an open mind, but I come to it also with a grave concern about this groundwater issue. And right now, based on what I've seen, without going back and looking at potential proposed conditions, what I see is a battle of experts. And, it's difficult for us to reach a decision and to try and assess that. Particularly when the consequences of that decision could be significant and grave for a number of people. So I think that's an excellent suggestion. And I think we'll do that. We'll go back and look at all of the various reports from Tetra Tech and Horsley and Witten and others, and see what people have recommended by way of ways to ameliorate the problem.
I think that's kind of where you want to start. And then also be thinking about what are they asking for waivers from, and that can help kind of guide you too for maybe things you really want to be looking for in the memos from the peer review consultants. Did they have comments? Because I suspect they probably did on some of the waiver requests.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, can I say something?
Yeah,
there is, I guess, or a notice of intent. I can't remember whether Jesse said it has been filed or was going to be filed with the conservation. I think he may have said it's already been filed with the Conservation Commission. But as I recall it from the plans, the Conservation Commission does not have jurisdiction, I don't think, over the entire site. Is that right? I think the the area of that's subject to their jurisdiction is not, or is actually, I think, not a very large portion of the site, although some of it is where buildings would be built. So I mean, it might be good to have for the next meeting, if we could get it, a copy of the notice of intent that was filed, so we can see what portion of the project is also going to be considered by the Conservation Commission.
One of the things I had thought about doing tonight, but I didn't think we were prepared to do it, and maybe we could be prepared for the next session of the public meeting, is to go through the list of requested waivers, which is dense. I mean, this is the package of requested waivers that Jesse was kind enough, Mr. Shoma was kind enough to give us, and it's exhaustive, and some of them deal with the water issues, and that may be a way of sort of intelligently informing us as to what some of the problems are and how they might be ameliorated. For example, and I'm speaking from ignorance when I say this, but maybe there's some waiver that's requested that if we didn't grant it, maybe it would address some of the issues that we are concerned about with water, and that we could rely on that instead of a turn down for the project. So, I mean, I think that might be helpful for the next session if we just took this
Yeah,
and went through it page by page and talked about, and some of them are really easy. It's not, you're not going to spend a lot of time on some of these, but some of them are complicated.
right.
And I think if we went through that list of waivers, it might inform us on some of the major issues here. At least I had thought about that, and then I realized I couldn't ask you guys to do it just off the cuff. And so maybe if we all read through these and we're ready to talk about them for the next session, that might be a helpful way to go.
Yeah, I do think you need to limit your deliberations at this point to what you have on the record of your case.
Oh, sure.
Just
Okay.
avoid kind of going outside the record of the hearing.
I don't think we can go outside the record.
That's
Okay.
fine. I think that,
But what,
sorry, Ted.
no, that's okay. Go ahead. Go ahead. You're,
Just going to say that Sean Reardon often makes comments in his peer review reports on waiver requests. So I'll go back to and look at them and see if he made any specific comments about the waivers. But yeah, there is a pretty lengthy waiver list that you need to go through. And some of them are just procedural things. It's
Right.
and
But some of them, as I said, some of them may inform us though as to ways we could address issues without, disapproving, the project. I mean, for example, on page 7 of the list of requested waivers that Mr. Schomer gave me, it's all requirements applicable to wetlands under the Milton Wetlands bylaw. A waiver is sought for every single one of them. That's something we can discuss. Stormwater management bylaws also requirements being waived. So I think some of them are fairly benign, but there's some pivotal ones in there that I think if we had gone through these carefully and read them, that we could have sort of an intelligent discussion as to whether or not it made sense, given the concerns that we've articulated tonight, whether it makes sense to grant some or all of the waivers or not. I think that might be a helpful way to go about this. You guys agree, disagree?
I agree. I think maybe one thing we might be able to do tonight is if we're going to go through waivers, provisions which relate to matters not only of wetlands, but other matters with respect to the project, is maybe go over any other issues we may have. We talked about how the ones, the groundwater and the fill were major issues, but maybe we ought to go over all of the issues so that as we're going through the waivers, we know what other things we need to think about.
Okay.
Yeah, and some of them may be fairly easy, and
Right.
You sort of narrow it down to the ones that are not so easy, and that's certainly a valid way to go about this.
Yeah, Ted, I think you hit on the big ones, but I mean, one that just pops into my mind is, and I know that it's a concern to lots of people, is trees and how many trees are going to be removed and how we can deal with the issue of trees. I mean, I hesitate to call it a minor issue, right? It's just a different issue from the groundwater issue, but that's an example of an issue that we might be able to address by way of condition. To the satisfaction of neighbors, because it doesn't seem to be as intractable a problem potentially as water might be, and so that's one that comes to mind. Just jumping around a little bit. I mean, one of the conditions I think that we would necessarily impose, and this came up in the course of the hearings, was how to deal with the secondary access. I mean, I think that we would have to impose a condition that secondary access be available for use by emergency vehicles, which may call into question an issue that's not within our purview, which is who has rights within that way that would provide the secondary access. That's an issue for another forum and other people. But that certainly would be something that we would condition, that there would be legitimate valley access to provide that secondary fire access to the site. I think that's probably not very controversial. I think we would do that in any event. So, but yeah, so I mean, those, trees, trying to think of some of the others. I mean, I don't know, Ted, you raised the good point at the beginning about the size of the project and the height of the project. I don't know that we have really enough good information to make any kind of intelligent decision that says, something like knock off 2 buildings or knock off a floor, or I don't know how we could ever arrive at a condition that, in that regard, that would be sustainable. Because I don't think we've
What's
had
in the
really,
record? It's what's in the record.
yeah, I don't think there's anything in the record that would allow us to make an intelligent decision on that. So, at least that I remember, and you guys may remember differently, but again, I think we would be well served if we just spent the time at the next hearing to go through this list of waivers, the requested waivers, and see what we think about them. I think it will help us to fully identify all of the issues, those that are difficult, those that are not, and we can go from there.
I guess construction management is another issue. I don't know that there are any waivers related, that would relate to that. Construction traffic, and I guess post-construction traffic as well. Let's see.
Those might be things, Ted, that we could deal with by way of conditions.
Yeah. We have done that in other decisions. We've written some pretty prescriptive.
No, I know, but they may relate to waivers too. I mean, I just want to keep everything in mind. If we're going to go over the waivers list once, we ought to maybe try to deal with anything that may come up. You're right. I've seen decisions where they're dealt with definitely as conditions, but
yeah.
I guess most of the ones that I kind of written down, thinking about it, relate in some fashion to the stormwater and groundwater mounding and those issues for the most part. So, Mike, can you think of any others?
Yeah, I mean, just going through the list here, I don't see anything. I mean, I share your concern about the traffic and construction management plan. I just don't see anything in the waivers that would address that. There's a waiver from Chapter 10, Section 4A regarding earth materials removal and fill.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be one I think that we would want to discuss.
Well, and that typically is the entree to construction, management, traffic related conditions, because this isn't the only project where you end up with this issue of a lot of material being brought in or hauled out. And, it's temporary problem, but it's a real problem while it's temporary.
Well, I don't see it necessarily as temporary, because I also see the amount of fill being linked directly to water, right?
Right, I understand.
In this case, but I see what you mean. But I think it's kind of related to both.
Right.
In this case, I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm just saying.
Although Judy,
yeah.
I don't think there's too many cases. I mean, I agree. I mean, soil and removal of soil is always an issue, but I don't think you find too many cases where you have 7 to 9 feet being added to the site. I mean, I don't think there's too many of those around. Because there's water problems on the site and they need all that fill to deal with it. I mean, it's just that simple. So it's a twofer. It introduces, it addresses a couple of different issues at the same time. But again, we can deal with that. I think the logical way for us to go is to go through these requested waivers at the next session to try and inform ourselves in the interim, although there's not much of an interim, but try to inform ourselves as to what some of the consultants have said about potentially some conditions that we might consider. But I think we'll learn a lot by just going through these pages and just talking about each of the requests. Many of which I think we'll deal with summarily, but there'll be a couple that we'll have to think about and talk about for a while. That would be my recommendation.
Okay. Can we also, do you think, maybe think about the possibility of some conditions that might be appropriate to address some of the concerns that we have about that issue?
Sure. I mean, I think that
because there are some suggested conditions that have been submitted by I think by the Board of Selectmen, by Planning Board, by Mr. Corcoran. I think there were a few in Mr. Dillon's report. So I think they related to setbacks, but in any event, that might be helpful to be able to talk about them at the next hearing as well. And then I think it also helps with the issue of, you know, whether we feel comfortable that it could be dealt with, the issue can be dealt with adequately by imposing conditions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Is there anything else that we can do that would be productive tonight?
Probably decide on when you want to get together again.
Well, I think we've done that, Judy. In fact,
Oh, I'm sorry.
Crystal, could you give us a list of the final list of the current dates that we've kind of scheduled this for?
Sure, let me look at my calendar really quick. So this Thursday at 7.
What date is that? I'm sorry. That's the 31st?
31st, yes.
Okay, 3:31 at 7.
Monday, April 4th at 5.
Isn't there a Board of Appeals meeting on Thursday night about East Milton?
No,
Okay.
no, John, he couldn't do that. Their meeting's the following week. So we had that. That's why I put this in.
Got it. Sorry.
No, that's okay. And then Thursday, April 7th at 7. Tuesday, April 12th at 7.
I'm just trying to get these in my calendar.
Okay.
I can also just send you an email with the dates.
That's you.
And I believe that's it so far. I haven't really looked at the very end of the month yet.
Okay.
So what's probably going to happen, just because of the time of year it is, I have quite a few public hearings, not about 40Bs, but about zoning, because I do a lot of zoning work that's planning board public hearings for town meetings. So if there's a schedule conflict and I can't be here, I'll talk to Brian before a meeting and kind of try to go through, you know, any issues that we think we probably need to talk about before you guys meet. Obviously, if I can join you, I will. And if I have to join you a little late, I will. And there are nights when Tim probably can be here when I can't. And so on some of these, you know, the matters around what's on the record and potential conditions, I know Tim can be available to help too. And meanwhile, I'll start at least pulling the skeleton together of a decision.
Okay,
So that, the procedural history and so forth, I can write that.
yeah,
Where it starts to fall apart is if you decided you were going to deny the project, I would probably, orient some of the findings a little differently than I would if it were.
of course, of course. But we're not unmindful of how difficult it is to sustain a denial.
Oh, yeah,
I mean, I'm very much mindful of that. As Judy knows, I've tried probably 8 to 10 40B cases over the years. And the only one I've ever lost was when I represented a town. So I'm painfully aware of how difficult it is. The Housing Appeals Committee is tough on towns. If they're not at 10%, they're tough. And they're very much on the side of affordable housing. And I think we all understand that. So,
well, I think they read it as the the legislature's intent in the statute. I mean, the law is pretty clear. I'm not advocating one way or another for 648 can't NAV. I'm just saying that, that the law is about providing affordable housing. And so absent that consistency with local needs standard of 10%, the whole burden's on you.
right.
And that's hard.
It's a very difficult burden. All right, so we've got those 4. I thought we had scheduled some for later in the month, but that's okay. But we can continue to schedule. Judy, just from a practical standpoint, when do you? So you can start to work on a skeleton, but keeping in mind that my understanding is that we have to file this decision by May 4th. I think.
Is that 40 days? That's 40 days.
I think the 40th day falls on May 3rd.
Okay.
So we would have until the Monday. From your timing standpoint, when do you have to really be working in earnest on a draft decision?
Well, I should probably start working on it. Getting the meat of it pulled together, I should probably start this weekend. There's just a lot of material to go through. I mean, I don't have the difficult job that you guys do, but I do kind of need to really be, have a command of what's in the record. So I can certainly start the procedural history. I can, do the jurisdictional findings. That's not going to change. I mean, some of those pieces are just what they are.
Right.
What's a little bit difficult for me, until you guys are a little more comfortable with where you want to go with this, is where the sort of weight of the analysis goes on the findings of fact from the record. But I mean, I can be working on it now. I'm doing the same thing with East Milton, so I feel like I'm writing a bunch of 40B decisions with Milton Board of Appeals. So I'm in that mode.
Okay.
Brian, can I say something? I think I have in my notes from the last meeting that someone said at the last meeting that the date that the decision was due on was May 2nd. And if you count from the, March 22nd, which is when the hearing closed, right? It was a week ago. There's 9 days in March and then 30 days in April, which would be 39. And then the next day would be May 1st, which is a Sunday. And then May 2nd. So maybe that's how I came up with the 2nd. But unless you may have counted it differently.
I think that's the right date.
I heard that from Tim as well. I just wasn't exactly sure, which would make sense, I guess, if the 1st is on a Sunday, like you said, so it rolls over to Monday.
May 2nd is what it looks like to me.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's try then before this next hearing on Thursday to get us up to speed on some of the stuff as we can, and let's plan to start with a list of requested waivers and just forge ahead and get through as much of it as we can on the 31st. And I think it will begin to inform us on really what the real issues are and how we're going to deal with them.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, well, I think we can probably stop then for the evening. I think we probably accomplished as much as we can tonight. And we'll come back in earnest on Thursday and begin work on the list of requested waivers. And I thank Jesse for doing that. It's very comprehensive and it's sort of well explained. And it's sort of easy to read and get through. And I appreciate that.
Well, the waiver list that,
Yes.
yeah, they're very clear. They're very helpful. They're much better than any of the others I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, I was really impressed with the quality of it. So it's easy to get through and hopefully easy to discuss each of the points. And as I said, a lot of them you're gonna breeze through, and there'll be some that will stop us, and we'll have a fulsome discussion. So appreciate your participation tonight as always, and I look forward to beginning this process anew on Thursday.
All right.
Thanks to all.
Yeah.
And thank you,
so
Crystal,
much.
for your help.
Right.
See you again.
No problem.